All right, I know it's the first day of the school year and everything like that, and I'm not here, so you were thinking that maybe you might be able to get away with just doing a worksheet or something like that. But I would like you to try to follow along with the video. I've cut it down to try to do just the essentials, and then after you're done watching the video, then there will be a worksheet for you to do. So the objective today is to solve inequalities. Well, we'll go ahead and go back and let me get this set up again. To solve inequalities that contain one or more operation. What do we say an inequality was? Something that is not equal. So less than, greater than, not equal to, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Those are inequalities, as opposed to like 5x is equal to 10. That would be an equality. This here would be an inequality, so 5x is less than or equal to 10. That would be an inequality. So we're going to be working on solving inequalities that contain more than one operation. In this case, the inequality that I wrote down right here has only one operation, which is multiplication. It's 5 times x is less than or equal to 10. So there's only one operation in this. In order to make this so that it had more than one operation, we would need to say plus 1 or any other operation that would add on to that. So I could say plus 1, and I could say 2x plus 1 plus 5x. That would work. Those types of things. Or I could put this in parentheses and say 3 times 2x plus 1. All of that, there's more than one step. So that contains more than one operation. Inequalities that contain more than one operation require more than one step, as I had said before, to solve. Use inverse operations. What did we say inverse meant? Do you guys remember that from before? In simple words, we said inverse means the opposite, to do the opposite. So what would be the opposite of multiplying by 5? That would be to divide by 5. And you would divide everything on this side of the equation by 5 and everything on this side by 5. But you wouldn't want to do that until you have simplified the expression right here. So that's what we're going to be working on. We're going ahead and get started on that. So solve the inequality and graph the solutions. So first thing I want you to do is you need to be taking notes on this. So you're going to go ahead and set the date. So it's going to be January 4th, 2016. And it's going to be chapter 3.4 and solving multi-step inequalities. When you have that written down, I want you to write down this on your paper. So I will do that. 8 minus 3y is greater than or equal to 29. Now there's two things that are happening on the left-hand side of the equation. We have this 8 and we have this 3y. So we ask ourselves, what are those two things doing? So the first thing I'm going to ask is, what is this 3 doing to the y? And everybody should be thinking multiply, and you would be right. But then the tricky question is, what is this 8 doing to the 3y? And when you have to ask yourself, what is in front of the 8? Because that lets you know what the 8 is doing. What is in front of the 8 right there? There is nothing in front of the 8, which implies that that is a positive 8. So if I said like this, what would this 8 be doing? It's essentially adding itself to the negative 3y. So I want to do, what's the opposite of adding 8? I want to subtract 8 from both sides. So 8 minus 8 is 0, so that cancels out. We're left with negative 3y is greater than or equal to 29 minus 8 is 21. Notice how I brought down the negative. You need to bring down that negative. If you did not bring down that subtraction and make it into a negative 3y, you would be making a mistake, and you would forget that, and your answer would be wrong. Now, we have, what is this negative 3y, or negative 3 doing to the y? And everybody's thinking multiplication, so we do the opposite. The opposite of multiplication is to divide. So divide by negative 3, divide by negative 3. Now, when you divide by a negative number, what happens to the inequality? That's right. It flips the sign. Now, I know you're thinking, Jeremiah, we're watching the video. Why do you have to ask us questions like Blue's Clues? Well, I don't know how else to do it, so that's what I'm doing. So negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1, and that negative and negative cancel out, becomes positive. Y is less than or equal to, and 21 divided by negative 3 ends up with a negative 7. So multi-step problems, we did 2 things on that, which gives us 2 steps that we had to do in order to solve the equation. Remember, a negative means you have to flip the sign, and therefore we ended up with y is greater than or equal to negative 7. Now, solve the inequality and graph the solutions. So, first thing that I want you to do is copy down the equation. You're right, whoever was saying that or was thinking it, graph the solutions. We did not do that. So we got to go back and do that. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, negative 7, negative 7. And now it says y is less than or equal to. So which direction are we going to end up graphing that? Well, actually, before we ask that question, we ask ourselves, is the circle open or closed? And we know that the circle is closed because there is an extra information right here that needs to match here. So we end up with a closed circle. And then we ask ourselves, does the arrow point to the left or does the arrow point to the right? And we will say that the arrow goes to the left because it says y is less than. Let me ask you the question. Is negative 8 less than negative 7? Yes. So have we graphed it the correct way? Yes, we have. Now going back to here, I want you to write down the equation. 1 minus 2n over 3 is greater than or equal to 7. Now don't be getting up to leave. I know you probably heard that bell and you're trying to take advantage of a substitute and said, oh, that was the bell, it's time for us to leave. That just happened to be in the recording, so everybody sit down. I see you, Mason. Actually, I don't even know if he's even here today. Well, he's not in the room right now, obviously, but I meant in the classroom on Monday. Mason, I know you wouldn't actually get up to leave. I was just picking on you because I figured you could handle it. All right, so everybody has 1 minus 2n over 3 is greater than or equal to 7. So the first thing that we need to do is figure out what is happening to n. There's a couple of... You hear the bell that time? Yep. And everybody stayed seated. I'm proud of you. I'm assuming so. All right. 1 minus 2n. So the 2 is multiplying n. The 1, is that a positive or a negative? That's a positive. And then we have divide by 3. So the first thing that I like to do is get rid of the denominator. So the opposite of dividing by 3 is to multiply by 3. That's right. And you multiply everything by 3. So we ask ourselves, what is 3 divided by 3? That's 1, so they cancel out. And you're left with what's there. So 1 minus 2n is greater than or equal to 21. Now that we have this, we ask ourselves again, we look at this positive. My goodness, there's a lot of bells. People aren't even here. So it's a positive 1. So the opposite of a positive 1 is to subtract 1. So we subtract 1 from both sides. And we end up with negative 2n, got to bring that negative down, is greater than or equal to 20. So now at this point, we have a negative 2 times n is greater than or equal to 20. So we do the opposite. We divide by a negative 2. What happens when we divide an inequality by a negative? That's right. We flip the sign, so it's going to be less than or equal to. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Negative divided by negative is a positive, so we're left with n. 20 divided by 2 is 10. And a positive divided by a negative is a negative, so negative 10. Now we graph the solution. So this is going to be 0, negative 10. And then we ask ourselves, is the circle going to be open or closed? And we look at the extra information there and we realize that it needs to be closed. Now, does the arrow point to the left or does it point to the right? We know it points to the left because n is on the left-hand side and this arrow points to the left. If n was on the right-hand side and we had negative 10 is greater than or equal to n, we could not have the arrow point the same direction because, let me ask you, is negative 8 less than negative 10? No, it would not be, so we could not point to the right. So there we go. All right, our graph should look like that. So the second type of question that you will have is simplifying before solving inequalities. So if you take a look at this equation, go ahead and write this down with me. 2 minus negative 10 is greater than negative 4t. When you take a look at this equation, you will notice that it's just numbers on the left-hand side. So before we go about solving the equation, we need to simplify. So it's 2 minus a negative 10. What happens when you subtract a negative? Well, some of you might be saying bam, bam, or you might be thinking a negative, or to subtract a negative means to make a positive. That's what I think of. So bam, bam, or I made it positive, so that's 2 plus 10 is greater than negative 4t. And to continue the simplification now, 2 plus 10 is 12, greater than negative 4t. And then at this point, what do? We divide by negative 4, divide by negative 4. And when we divide by a negative, we switch the inequality sign. We end up with negative 3t. T is greater than negative 3. Or, if we were to rewrite that, we could say t is greater than negative 3. So now we graph that inequality. So negative 3. Now as we graph that, do we circle that in? Do we fill in the circle? No, because there is no equal sign underneath that. So we leave it open. Now does the arrow point to the left or does it point to the right? Since t is on the left, the arrow points the same direction. So it goes like that. Example 2c. And you're thinking, what happened to the other examples? Well, I simplified and got rid of example 2b so that there would be enough time for you guys to be able to do your work in class and maybe get some help from your friends. Solve the inequality and graph the solutions. So write down the equation first. let me get black up. So now we have 3 on the bottom here, and 3 on the bottom here, and 2 on the bottom here. What I'm going to end up doing, since those do not match, I'm going to multiply everything by 6. Times by 6, times by 6, times by 6. Does anybody know why I'm multiplying by 6? Because it's the least common multiple. 2, 3, and 2, to be able to get those to match up, I need them to become the same number. I can get 3 to become 6, and I can get 2 to become 6. Therefore, I'm going to multiply everything by 6. And that will get rid of my denominators, and then I will no longer have a fraction to be able to add up. So I have 6 divided by 3 is, because essentially I'm multiplying by a fraction here, 6 divided by 3 is 2. So then 2 times 2 is 4. So I end up with 4f plus, and then 6 divided by 2 is 3. And then 3 times 1 is 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So I end up with 2. 2 times 1 is 2. So I now have 4f plus 3 is greater than 2. That's usually how I go about solving problems as fractions. I get rid of the fraction and by getting rid of the denominator by multiplying by the least common multiple. So now I have 4f plus 3 is greater than 2. I could divide by 4, that would be fine, but then I would end up with a fraction again. I'd end up with 3/4. I don't want to do that. So dividing by 4 is not my first choice. Therefore, my first choice would be the opposite of what the 3 is doing. And what is the 3 doing? Well, we look right in front of it, and what does it say? It says plus. So we do the opposite of adding, which is to subtract. So subtract 3, subtract 3. And you end up with 4f, because 3 cancels out, because it becomes 0. 4f plus 0 is just 4f, is greater than -1. Now, what is the 4 doing to the f? It's multiplying. So we do the opposite, which is to divide. So I divide each side by 4. Divide by 4. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why didn't you switch the inequality when you subtracted by 3, Jeremiah? You do not switch that inequality right here when you subtract by 3. It's only when you multiply or divide by a negative. Am I multiplying or dividing by a negative when I divide by 4? No, I'm just dividing by a positive. So the inequality does not switch. So I end up with f is greater than -1/4. So now I'm going to graph that up. And so I'm just going to graph this in terms of quarters, because that seems like the easiest way to be able to graph it. So we'll say 0, -1/4, -2/4. What's -2/4? It's actually -1/2, -3/4, and -1. So now I graph this, and we'll go ahead and go like this and say 1/4, just like that. So as I fill this in right here, f is greater than -1/4, so it's going to be right here. Do we circle that? Do we fill that circle in? No. And which way does the arrow point? Since f, or the variable, is on the left-hand side, then we can have the arrow match the same direction as the inequality. All right. So now it's time to go over the word problem.